We are officially in a junk wax boom. Crazy times we're in right now. Card prices have absolutely exploded. And along with junk wax cards, which is just really interesting to me because these cards are mass produced. But it's also kind of an interesting indicator of how well the hobby's doing if these mass-produced cards from the 80s and 90s, these iconic cards from iconic players, are doing. If they're doing well, that's certainly an indicator that the rest of the hobby is doing well. But man, have these cards exploded in price. So I wanted to go through and talk about what these cards are going for, what I paid for them, and kind of just my opinion about these cards. I know I'm not the first YouTuber to do this, but I certainly want to share my opinion on it and why I think these cards have increased in value and what's going to happen to them in the future. And so start off with the oldest to newest in terms of the cards I have. The junk wax era. This is the classic 83 Topps Tony Gwynn and a PSA 9. I paid $55 for this card in 2017. Now this card is going for $175. There are 4,014 PSA 9s and 655 PSA 10s. So now I also want to talk about what I think all these cards should be worth, what their fair market price should be, what's a reasonable price for these cards. And I think this card should be worth $125 and not $175. I know Gwynn is one of the best hitters of his era, and this is a pretty iconic card, especially for 83 Topps. But I think at $175 for a PSA 9 is just, it's pretty high. I think a good fair price for this card is at around $125. Then we have the 85 Topps McGwire. My gosh, this card has just exploded in price. I bought this card for $47 back in May of 2017. Now this card is worth $335. There are 6,035 PSA 9s, and there's only 302 PSA 10s. So a very tough card to get in a PSA 10, but there's over 6,000 PSA 9s. Now, a big reason why this card has increased in value is because of the documentary that's coming out on ESPN about the 1998 home run race between McGwire and Sammy Sosa. And so if you follow basketball cards, you know that basketball cards, specifically Jordan cards, have really gone up in value since the release of the Last Dance Jordan documentary. So the same thing has happened with this McGwire card. But I think as soon as this documentary is released and the hype of this doc goes away in 6 months to a year, if that, this card will go down in value. I think a fair price for this card, it should be a $125 card in my opinion. Yeah, this card was a big deal back in the day. I remember winning this card when it was in Beckett's, but like I said, there was over 6,000 PSA 9s of this card, and I think it should be worth more than what I got it for when I got it for $50. But I think $335 is crazy. This card, fair market card, fair price for this card should be about $125. Then you have, we're into 86 is the Fleer update card. I do not have the 86 Topps traded card. That card has gone up even more than the Fleer update card. The reason I had this card is because this Fleer update card is in the PSA registry set for the 500 Home Run Club. This card is also, the Fleer update card's a little more short printed than the Topps rated card, and I believe it's also harder to get in a PSA 10 because of the dark blue borders. I paid $103 for this card back in September 2018. There's a pop of 1,302 cards in PSA 10, and there's been 19,000 graded. So it is a relatively tough card to get in a PSA 10. Now this card's going for $230. This is one of the few junk wax cards that I think are actually fair, are priced about right. I do think this card should be worth around $230 because Barry Bonds is the home run king. Yes, he did steroids, but this is definitely a card with I think lots of room to grow. I mean, maybe not much more than $230, but I think when we're seeing players that have been suspected of doing steroids getting inducted to the Hall of Fame, I think there's a good chance that Barry Bonds can get inducted. Even if he doesn't, I think a lot of people consider Barry Bonds to be the best player of all time. I don't know if I believe in that, but I think for the longest time these Barry Bonds rookies are really undervalued, and now they're kind of, I think, getting the deserved price that they should be getting. So right now, around $230 is what it's going for, and I think this is actually a fair price for a Barry Bond rookie card. Speaking of Barry Larkin, I let that slip out. This is the 87 Topps Tiffany Barry Larkin card. This card is pretty surprising to me. If you follow my channel, you know I collect Barry Larkin cards, especially his 90s inserts. What's interesting about this card is the best Barry Larkin rookie card was always this clear glossy card in a PSA 10. They're a little more short printed than the Topps Tiffany cards. They're kind of harder to get in a PSA 10. But this card now, in the last couple of months, has surpassed the Flair Glossy card in value. So I bought this Topps Tiffany card for about $40 in 2013. Now they're going for about $125. There's only about 401 PSA 10s, and there's a total pop of 1,566 graded. Part of the reason why these are kind of a low pop is because I don't think a lot of people are grading Barry Larkin cards. But this is a relatively tough set to get in a PSA 10 because of the wood borders. But yeah, it's really interesting to see that this card now is Barry Larkin's best rookie card. So this card now goes for around $90 to $100, which is what I got it for a couple years ago. And this card is now going for $125. So I think what's happening is because people are starting to really recognize the top flagship cards and modern cards as the best card to get. That's kind of translating over to the older cards. So that's, I think, why this Topps Tiffany card now is Barry Larkin's best card. I do think $125 is a little bit overpriced for a Barry Larkin rookie. I think this card should be around $100, not $125. Now, this is the king of all junk wax cards for sure. The 89 Upper Deck Ken Griffey Jr. and a PSA 9. So I bought this card in 2013 for $43. Now, this is not a typo. There are 24,137 PSA 9s graded. There's 3,799 PSA 10s graded. There's over 73,000 of Griffeys in the total PSA pop report. So, I mean, there are 24,000 PSA 9s, and now this card's worth $200. Now, I just do not think this card should be worth $200 when there's 24,000 of these graded in a PSA 9. I know there's always a demand for Griffey cards, but there is just so much supply. I think a fair price for this card is around $100. Certainly not $200. There's just way too many of these cards, and more and more will get graded too. So many upper decks, 89 upper deck out there. All right, this set's pretty interesting. 89 Upper Deck was kind of the first premium baseball card with the really high quality photography. And then 1990 Leaf came along a year later with their high quality photography and design and gloss. And this 1990 Leaf Frank Thomas, I paid $63 for this card in 2017. Now this card is worth $300. There is a PSA 10 pop of 3,456 cards, over 17,000 graded. Now I do think this card was undervalued for the longest time. I mean, you can get these cards for around $100. When I got this card, it was around $60, but you know, $120, $100 all day for a PSA 10 Frank Thomas. I think $300 is overvalued for this card. I think a more of a fair price for this card is around $200, which I think is a lot for a junk wax card. But this is another iconic card. Definitely a lower population than the 89 Upper Deck card. Now the 89 Upper Deck PSA 10 is going for a ton of money, like over $1,000. But I think a PSA 10 Leaf Frank Thomas should go for around $200. He's one of the few guys from this era that hit home runs that didn't do steroids, and he's in the Hall of Fame. But $300 I think is way too much for a 1990 Leaf Frank Thomas. Then you got this card, the 1990 Leaf Sammy Sosa. This card is crazy. So I bought this card for $35 back in 2017. You could get this card for $15 to $30 all day long in a PSA 10 for the longest time. There are 1,695 PSA 10s, and there's over 25,000 cards graded. Now this card is going for $285, so it's going for almost as much as the Frank Thomas, which is also interesting too, because like I said, there's 25,000 of these graded by PSA. There's only quote unquote only 17,000 Frank Thomases graded by PSA. And I think the reasoning behind that is because a lot of people were grading Sosa around 1999 and 2000 and maybe 1998, which is around the time that PSA came about. And so I think there's a greater population of Sammy Sosa than Frank Thomas, even though Frank Thomas is a better player. He's in the Hall of Fame. He didn't get caught using steroids, but there's probably a ton of old slabbed Sammy Sosas, because when the card companies came about, Sosa and McGwire was huge. But this card should not be teetering at about $285. The documentary is definitely hyping this card, but I think this card should be worth $60, and that's generous. He's not in the Hall of Fame. He'll never be in the Hall of Fame. Really, no one cared about Sammy Sosa before 1998. Yeah. And then this card, I think you could kind of consider this to be junk wax, borderline. It's definitely a limited set, but this is the 1994 SP Alex Rodriguez foil card. This card I bought in 2016 for $60. Now, this card is definitely hard to get in a higher grade. It's not as hard as the 1993 SP. The set that has a Jeter rookie, but this is still a tough set. It's got black borders. It's got a foil front. And so there's only 1,527 PSA 9s and only 58 PSA 10s, and there's 15,000 of these cards graded. So pretty tough to get in a 9 and almost impossible to get in a 10. Now this card is worth $525. Now, I'm not too surprised by that, and I think a fair price for this card is $400, which is still very high for this card. But the reason why I think this card should be around $400 is because people are coming back in the hobby that collected when they were a kid in the 80s and 90s. They're now in their 30s and they have some more money to spend, and they remember A-Rod as potentially the Trout of the late 90s and 2000s. And then of course he got caught twice for doing steroids and kind of became known as a douchebag. But I think he's kind of cleaned up to his image a bit by being the MLB host. And I think this card will always have this sort of iconic status in the hobby, because this card used to be worth a ton, and now it's raising in price again. PSA 10s I think now go for almost $8,000. So compared to the PSA 9 Jeter, this is actually a pretty good deal. But I think at $525, that's a little steep for this card. I think a fair price for this card would be $400, because I don't think he'll ever get in the Hall of Fame. I mean, he got caught twice for steroids. But yeah, really interesting. I mean, so I paid What did I pay? I paid $344 for these 8 cards that I showed you throughout the years. Now these cards are worth $1,945.
Say what?
Almost $2,000 for, a lot of these cards were barely worth more than 30 to 60 bucks for the longest time. Nuts. How much these cards have increased in value. But yeah, so what is happening right now? Why are these cards going up in value? Why specifically too, like junk wax cards? So the reason I think this is happening is because, like I kind of mentioned earlier, people that were collecting these cards as kids in the 90s are now in their 30s, and when you're in your 30s, you definitely have a lot more money to spend on disposable things because your career is really moving along in your 30s usually. Social media has become a huge reason why these cards have increased in value. Back when I started my YouTube channel in, I think, 2012, I'm not exaggerating here, there was probably less than 25 channels that were doing sports card videos. Hardly any out there. Now there's probably, hundreds, maybe 500 so. I don't know. Like there's a ton, and not just that, but these channels now are just really well made, high production value channels with, flashy intro slides and thumbnails that are kind of clickbait, with the classic point and the glow effect and the big lettering, title cards and all kinds of things are driving people to want to click on these videos. And these videos now are a lot of these videos are now geared towards investing and flipping as opposed to collecting. And so, and then you got places like Instagram where people are wanting to show off their collection, and Facebook groups. But now, how specifically is these cards exploded because of the Rona situation? Well, the stimulus checks. At first, I didn't believe that people were actually going to spend their stimulus checks on baseball cards, but I think I'm wrong. I've seen many people on baseball card forums saying they're spending their stimulus checks on baseball cards. I think that's kind of crazy. And you have this whole thing about how people are just bored at home. People can't spend their money on concerts. What's the point of spending money on clothing when no one's going to see you wear clothing? If you're just stuck inside. Even gas. People aren't really driving around as much. So you have, what am I going to spend money on? I guess I'll spend money on baseball cards. And then you have this perfect storm of like the Jordan documentary that came out, where people are really into basketball cards really exploded because of the Jordan documentary. Like I sold a 1990 Fleer Michael Jordan PSA 10 for $300. Now I made a video in 2017. I'll put it in the link below where I talked about how this card went from $60 to $300 out of nowhere, and how crazy that is. And I just held on to that card, never sold it, and it went back down to $60. Now I had sold it for $300 a couple weeks ago, and now I think it's back down to $200. But that's a clear example of how the hype of this documentary has increased card values of Jordan, and now the Jordan cards are going down a little bit as this documentary is going away. But anyway, that documentary definitely got people's interest in the sports cards. I can guarantee it, and that kind of led its way to baseball cards. You have things too like the National has been canceled, or it's been postponed to December. It's probably been canceled, but I think you have people that were saving up their money for the National in September that aren't going to go to the National anymore. So now they're maybe considered buying sports cards. Gary V, he has a huge presence, and it doesn't take hundreds of millions of followers to increase a card's price. It just takes a couple million, and he's got that. And so where do I think this is going to go? What's next for these cards, specifically these junk wax cards? Well, I think they're called junk wax for a reason. They just made a ton of them. The supply is just so much, and I think compared to the demand, I think once baseball comes back, people will just want to go back to collecting modern cards, and these these sports gamblers that are buying baseball cards. That's another thing. I think sports gamblers are buying baseball cards now as a way to make some money. But once the baseball season starts, they're just gonna start betting on the actual games. But if baseball doesn't come back this year for the 2020 season, then I think these retired players, these players from the 80s and 90s, these junk wax cards could maintain their value, if not go up in value, because who's going to want to I don't know, buy Cody Bellinger if he's not playing, and guys like Ronald Acuna, who is not going to get the 30-30, 40-40 record or club this year if he's not playing. And then Cabrera, he might not get the 3,000 hit club or 500 home club this year because he's not playing. So people might be buying into vintage and these what I would call vintage modern cards now of these retired Hall of Famers or people that have done things like reach the 500 home run club. But I do think in a year card values could go down because right now there's over 21 million people that are unemployed. That's nearly 15% of the economy. There could be more unemployed. And when the country fully reopens and there is a vaccine, those 21 million people will not all just immediately get a job. This could take months, if not years, for the unemployment rate to get back to what it was just 6 months ago. And it might not affect you, but it will definitely affect the economy, and in turn it'll affect the baseball economy. It's like a domino effect. I mean, in 2008, the recession, baseball card prices did go down. They didn't go down as much as stocks. I mean, they're much more bulletproof than stocks because some people just don't want to give up their baseball cards as much as they want to give up their stocks. Stocks are not a tangible thing you can hold and look at, whereas baseball cards, some people are they want to hold on to them longer than something that's just a number on a screen. But I think with the looming recession that's probably going to happen, I think card prices could go down, and junk wax, because there's so many of them, will be the first to fall. So what to do next? What to do now? I think sell them if you got them, especially if you got duplicates. I don't have duplicates of many cards. I don't have duplicates of these cards, so I don't know if I'll ever sell them. But if you do, I highly suggest selling them now. I mean, I might sell a Sosa because this card's around $300 now, and I can guarantee you in a year this card's not going to be $300. You could probably get it for $60 to $30 again, and then you make a profit off of selling it for $300. So that's it. Hope you guys stay safe, be well. Later.